BTS is now a global phenomenon, but 5 years ago, when a popular Penn State University sociology professor predicted they would take over the world, not all of his students were convinced. Today, Dr. Sam Richards could be considered a visionary, someone who understood the potential of Korea in areas such as global culture, education, and even in the areas of climate change. On this episode, our globalist is Dr. Sam Richards, who talks about why the world is fascinated about Korea and what else Korea has to offer.
Is the 2016 award for our chapter's Outstanding Education Schools program. You can't say that. WPSU, Penn State.
This is the conversation. We're talking about skin. Skin, look.
Black, white, brown.
Politics.
Poverty. Gender roles.
Culture.
Religion.
Love.
Society, sexuality, everything.
If you don't know things like who these guys are, you're not going to compete in the world that is emerging.
Korean culture, this wave, Hallyu, is much more like a tsunami because it kind of came out of nowhere.
Welcome, Dr. Richards, to the Globalists.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here.
We are very honored, happy to have you here. Let's start off with BTS. 5 years ago, I saw one of your lectures in terms of 5 years ago you noticed BTS, which was a relatively early aspect.
Yeah, very much so.
Of BTS. What did you see in BTS at the time?
So I'm a musician. I started playing drums when I was 12, and I'm an amateur ethnomusicologist. So I listen to music from all over the world, including K-pop. I've been listening to K-pop for 20 years. And I was waiting for a K-pop group that was going to really explode onto the global stage. You know, so back in the day, Girls' Generation, there were different bands that I thought, okay, this is going to be big. But they never were somewhere like the United States. And then one day, that one morning, I woke up and I heard on the BBC that the BTS broke the 24-hour download record that was set by Taylor Swift. And I sat up in bed and I said, this is it, this is the band. And I had heard of BTS. I'm sure I had listened to BTS. But I went into class that day and I said, okay, now this is it, get ready.
So, dude, 45 million in 24 hours. Taylor Swift's record was like 43 and a half. How many have never heard of this band? Never heard of them. You want to know who these guys are.
BTS is the band, and you're going to know them. Your parents will know them. Your grandparents will know them. It's going to be the biggest pop group probably in the world.
But at that lecture, you said that when you asked your students how many knew about BTS, only 5 raised their hand.
Yeah, 5 or 6 or 7 or something, and nobody did. But you know, a year later, I asked the same question, and about 2/3 of the class raised their hand. And that's how quickly BTS swept through. Yeah.
So, have you heard the fact that BTS is now going to the military?
Yes.
Their fans, although they respect that decision, are heartbroken. Do you think that will have an influence on Korea's cultural influence in the world?
Well, I'm careful about wading into anything related to the Army. Because the
BTS fan club, the Army.
The Army,
not where they're heading.
No, not where they're heading. Because one never knows what you might say that would disrupt the Army or anger them. But there's a degree to which, from the outside, many people associate Hallyu and the Korean wave with BTS, and in some ways only with BTS. So there are two things, right? One is that for BTS to not get an exemption and to join the Army like all other Korean young men, it really reflects the communitarian-oriented kind of moral space here in Korea. That you do things for the community. This isn't just about individual power and money and so on. So it's a reflection of that, and also it breaks the spell that Hallyu and the wave is really about BTS, because it's not. It's about Korea, and there are so many pieces of this wave that lots of people don't see. And so I think, for me, I think it's a really good thing.
So it's a positive in a long-term view of the aspect of Korean culture in the world?
Yeah, from a wider perspective. Yeah.
But there seems to be a view both in Korea and outside of Korea that BTS and other bands like them, K-pop, is a young, teeny bopper kind of band, not to be taken seriously, and it would be a fad that passes. What do you think?
Well, I was at KCON in LA, and I went to my first K-pop concert. And first off, at KCON in general, I was surprised at the range of ages of people who were attending. And I was one of the oldest people there, but there were many, many people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And at the concert, I had my phone less focused on the stage and more focused on people around me and just taking video of all the fans and how diverse the fandom is. And so I don't think it's just for young people. I mean, this is really good music, and people are enjoying it, in the same way that rock and roll was, the foundation if we go back to the 60s and 70s, the foundation is young people. Many, many people were listening to rock and roll and other genres of music.
When you look at Hallyu, and you look at some Hallyu that is, of course, represented by BTS, but is actually, it's a wave. It's a much wider wave than BTS. What is the essence of Hallyu? What is the main attraction of Hallyu to an outside world?
All the pieces of Hallyu, of the wave, they all have unique Korean inflections on them. Not trying to be something for the rest of the world. It's like, no, we're going to do it the Korean way. And that is very unique in that sense, right? That they hold the Korean way, but put it out into the world. Now, mind you, when I think about K-pop, for example, K-pop is very much a mixture of lots of different genres of music, right? And so Korea's put their own spin on it, but in putting their own spin on it, it just becomes something that the world has never really seen or heard before in that way. And I think it's very similar with K-drama and K-film and just the nature of the storytelling that is done.
But the criticism K-pop gets is that it is very cookie cutter. I mean, it's like something you would make in a factory, that all the K-pop groups sort of sound the same, and they are, all trained in the same way. And there have been many stories about this kind of factory-driven K-pop. What do you think?
Well, when I was at KCON LA, I mean, I wasn't even certain when the bands left the stage. And if I wasn't watching, I wouldn't know that we changed groups. So the cookie cutter piece to it. And I think for K-pop to continue, it's going to have to evolve in some ways, because that's going to go away. The world's going to get tired of the same type of band. And the world, at some point in time, people around the world are not going to accept it. And what the people will turn their attention to is some new genre of music that is really a new kind of mixture. And maybe it comes out of Nigeria, or maybe it comes out of Turkey or Russia or somewhere. I don't know where it would come, but that's going to be difficult, because there's an entire industry that is built around producing these bands in this music. And it's really going to be difficult for dynamic ideas around the edges to get back to the center.
Well, Korea's pretty good at that, so we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, if we move away from K-pop, K-movies, for example, the ones that have gotten the most attention, the ones that have won the awards, or some of the recent dramas, don't reflect the kind of Korea that K-pop does. They portray a very a different side of Korea. I mean, and some find that a little disturbing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, Korea's going through a transition that is quite profound, moving from traditional Korean society to this new modern Korea with so many dynamic, fascinating elements. If you want to kind of feel have an understanding what the future is going to look like, then you turn to Korea. But if you want to understand what the past looks like in a traditional Eastern society, look to Korea. So there's this evolution. And I think because of the evolution, there are a lot of themes that need to come up. You know, I think about Squid Game and Parasite, themes of this transition from the old Korea to the new Korea. And it's not an easy transition. It's a very difficult one. And I mean, I'm sure you've lived it. You see this. And so what was is not what is not what will be. And so I think these themes that we're seeing in some of these films are reflecting that. And outsiders, if you're not following this shift from the traditional to the modern, then you don't really understand the power of these themes that are being addressed in the films.
And from the recognition that these movies get, it seems to be something that a lot of the other parts of the world are also trying to face and trying to overcome.
You know, the entire world is reckoning with modernization, but it hasn't happened. In most places, it has not happened as quickly and as profoundly as it has happened in Korea. Most countries have not gone from being extremely poor to extremely wealthy. And so therefore, it's not seen in the same way. It's not experienced in that way. And so we're all reckoning with it. And because Koreans are such good storytellers, you give us a way to put into words or put into visualizations, put into a story what we're actually experiencing ourselves.
That's why it resonates.
That's why it resonates. That's why, you know, Parasite is such an awesome movie. And, you know, when I think about, you know, my travels around the world and the cultures in which I know very well, Parasite fits. I can take that story and I can put it in Colombia or in Mexico or in Ireland, and it fits. It makes sense.
That's very interesting for Koreans to hear. The fact that, you know, what we think is a uniquely Korean story is not that unique, that other people look at that story and find bits of themselves in it.
Which country has the greatest number of internet users? How many of you have never heard of soju? Raise your hands. Tell me about it. What's good hair? What's bad hair? We can start right there. Good hair, bad hair. In your culture, who has the ideal skin? Put up for that video. Yeah.
I got nervous.
That's not part of the song. Yeah. Let me see. Hang on. Now look. Nice. No, hang on. No, dude, no, hang on. No, hang on. Right there. Okay, right there. Right, hang on.
I find your classes, the way you teach, very interesting. What makes your teaching method different?
Yeah. At some point in time, years ago, I asked myself what I remembered about my undergraduate experience. Students are sitting here and they're taking notes, they're memorizing things, they're cramming information into their minds, and then they're spitting it back on the exams. And they're not going to remember anything, but they might be inspired. And my students kept saying, well, they were inspired by my class. And so I realized all I have to do is inspire them. And inspire them to ask questions.
All you have to do is inspire
That's
them.
all I have to do.
That is a big
Well,
statement.
it's a big ask. But if they're busy writing down notes furiously and copying things that I say, they're not going to be inspired. But if they're thinking on their own as a result of something that I say or that other people in class say, then they're going to ask their own question. And if they ask their own question, then they're going to be inspired by the thoughts in their own mind. So each day, my goal is to confuse students. So when they leave, they're at least having some kind of argument with me or their parents or somebody out in the world or with themselves. Then that means they're taking my class out into the world. They're walking with it in their lives, and they're thinking about things in ways that they haven't thought before. And that's my job. I think that's what makes me different. What makes me different is I'm trying to confuse students.
Usually the goal is the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not to confuse them.
Well, the problem is when you don't confuse people, you do confuse them, because in the end, when they're done memorizing the ideas that they have, they're still confused because they don't remember any of it. But if they ask their own question, then they're more likely to be motivated to go out and find an answer to their own question. And that's my job.
Okay. Teacher to teacher here. I find it really difficult to get students to ask questions.
Yeah.
Same?
Well, what I do is I bring other students to the front of the room.
Oh, you
And
okay.
I
Go ahead.
ask them questions, and then they ask each other questions, and then they ask other people questions. And then when they're answering in some way, see, everyone in their seats is watching these students respond.
IB a big thing in Korea, or is it just like a small part of the population that do it?
IB schools in Korea, they have only like small population of students. It's very competitive to get there.
So, what do you guys think about bald hair? Would it be considered a good hairstyle or a bad hairstyle?
So, actually, like for girls, they don't prefer this kind of hairstyle.
They can now think, how would I respond to that question? What would I think? See, I can't get them to do it when I'm talking because they think I'm an expert that has lots of information, but they know that these other 4 students sitting on the table in the front of the room are not experts. And so they're now saying, how would I respond to that? Now they've asked the most important question is like, what would I say to that? And then while they're sitting in their seats, they're coming up with their own answer to that question. And I think, okay, I got it. I won. I won the teaching lottery, you see, because now they're thinking on their own terms.
And that's what got you the Emmy for that class?
I will say that was really I learned in doing that television show, and my wife and I, because we're collaborators, we very much work together. I would say we wrestled with teaching more than we ever had in the past. And I learned from her how to ask good questions. And then that is really what got us that Emmy Award for that particular show.
For those of us who haven't seen it, tell us a little bit about that show and how it led to the Emmy.
Yeah, so it was called You Can't Say That, which is in and of itself pretty big, that here I am going into a classroom and talking about things that we're not supposed to talk about.
Such as?
Such as race, such as skin color.
Okay, this Emmy goes to You Can't Say That, WPSU, Penn State.
I want you to pick out the darkest skinned person.
Over there. I'm sorry.
How important is hair for you? How important is hair for other women in your culture? What's it mean? And then we shifted from hair and we talked about skin. Let's talk about skin. Let's talk about skin whitening cream. Let's have this kind of conversation. Who uses it? Why do they use it? Why do you use it? What's the ideal skin tone for you? And how about, where did you learn that? These kinds of things. You don't ask those questions. And we don't ask them in the United States. Other people don't have those kinds of conversations. But for me, I'm deeply curious. I just want to know the answer to the question. Tell me what you see. And then once you start telling me what you see, well, now you're telling the rest of the world what you see because it's being recorded on camera, and the rest of the world has an opportunity to watch the video and say, oh, that's actually really interesting. Oh, I haven't thought of that.
I saw you using an aspect of that in talking about Korean culture, about your reenactment of the mukbang.
Yeah, mukbang, yeah.
And which mukbang is actually people really just eating in front of a camera.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so bro, give us a nice crunch.
Yeah. We're going to do it again, and we're actually we're going to do a fundraiser. I'm going to do it more seriously. Yeah.
So why did you do that, and what was the most interesting result?
Well, first off, 10 years ago, I played a mukbang video in class. I got onto a Korean site, and we found somebody eating live, and I just put it up on one of the screens, and it was there for 15, 20, 25 minutes, the whole class. So I'm having class, but this person's up on the screen eating. I didn't know who he was. I mean, he was just some random Korean person. And I find things like that to be absolutely fascinating. Why would somebody pay this person to eat? Like, that makes no sense to anybody. Well, I knew if it didn't make sense to me, it wouldn't make sense to my class. And so this is the beginning of a conversation because people do pay and mukbangers make a lot of money. And so that was 10 years ago. So then we come back and we start doing it in a different way. So, you know, it's all just curiosity, you know, and that's just Korea. So I'll do the same kind of thing, but, you know, out of Saudi Arabia or out of Brazil or out of Turkey or somewhere like that. Yeah.
I've heard you talk very highly about Korea's fervor
Yeah.
for education. Although I'm sure you hear from many Koreans about the other side of the emphasis on education, the difficulties of a society that puts too much emphasis on education. Where are you in this debate going back and forth about Korean education?
I think it's a minor miracle that Korean parents could convince kids to go to these cram schools at the rate at which they go to cram schools. Then as a miracle, as a sociologist, if I remove my judgment from it in the good and the bad, then I can stay with that and say, how do you do that? How is that possible, you know? Now, it comes with a certain amount of opportunity and a certain amount of fear, right? And you know, an awareness of what's possible, what opportunities are available to me, but also it's motivated by a fair amount of fear. And it's the fear that's a bit of a problem, as well as just spending so much time studying that really doesn't matter in the long run, probably. Well, my Korean students, who while they were in high school, they studied 2 to 3 times as much as my American students. They should be 2 to 3 times smarter. But on average, you can't be 2 to 3 times smarter. So then what happened as a result of that? To what degree did you actually then burn out trying to prepare yourself to get into college? Whereas many American students, they didn't do very much at all in high school, like myself. And by the time I got to college, I was just really ready to take off. My engine was just getting warmed up. But what I find with many Korean students is their engine is worn out. And it's very difficult to sustain that once you get into college. And so that, I think, can be a bit of a problem. Yeah.
But I did hear you say that if you had a child, you would send the child to Korea to study. Is it still?
I would definitely send my child to Korea.
Even
not
because
full
of
time. No, not for 4 years. But I would want them here for
Just
1 or 2 years to experience it and to understand. Look, people in the West have got to understand the dynamic cultural sensibility and ontological orientation of people in the East. Just like people in the East need to understand the West. You cannot understand the United States if you don't visit and live in the United States. You just can't. And you cannot understand Korea if you're not here for a long period of time. And there's something valuable about Eastern ontology. It's this way of being in the world that a human being can push off against for the remainder of their lives. And what I find among Americans who have lived in the East, who've lived in China or Korea or Japan, they have a way of intellectual foundation that is just very different than the average Westerner, and very different in a subtle way, but subtle in a way that really carries them in a profoundly fascinating and important way. And so I would want my child to have that. I would want my child to be able to tap into, again, this ontological sort of vision, this beingness that comes out of Korea at any moment. And I think they would be better served for that throughout their lives.
Well, I would want that too. I mean, I think in terms of a Korean raising a Korean child, I would want them to also experience a different kind of depth of another culture, another way of being, to widen their horizons, I guess, in a way. Lead into the empathy area.
Yeah.
That would allow people to really see the world from another person's eyes, going to a different window.
You know, I have Korean students who have really acclimated to U.S. culture. You know, they've been there long enough. Maybe they did 1 year of high school and they've been there long enough. And they're really Americanized. They're also Koreans. And so they can come back to Korean and be Korean, but they can also be Americanized in the West. And I think your whole life, you're going to benefit from your ability to tap into that part of you that became Americanized. It didn't change you forever, but it's something that you'll be able to tap into, and you'll always be able to understand the West in a Western perspective in a way that you would not have been able to do.
It's a very positive, I think, aspect of it, education.
Yes.
what education can do. Well, thank you very much. And we really enjoyed having you on the show.
I will say that I was very much looking forward to being on the Globalists.
That is great to hear. And for me, this episode of The Globalists, where we bring people that help Korea be put on the map. So that's it for me. Son Jie out.